Bwana Governor, welcome with your team. Please proceed, introduce your team.
Thank you very much, members. We've brought a big team, and I think it's in order to make the introductions. My name is Patrick Njoroge, Governor, Central Bank of Kenya.
My name is Sheila M'Mbijjewe, Deputy Governor, Central Bank of Kenya.
My name is Kennedy Abuga, Director, Legal Services, Central Bank of Kenya.
My name is Gerald Nyauma, Director, Bank Supervision Department.
I'm Wallace Kantai. I'm the Head of Communications at the Central Bank of Kenya.
Eunice Koyani, Assistant Director, Governor's Office.
Marisela Ouma, Assistant Director, Legal.
Mary Mende, Legal.
Isaiah Mana, Assistant Director, Research Department.
Dixon Degwa, Governor's Office.
All right. Yeah, I think that is your introduction. And of course, myself, I think I didn't introduce myself. I'm Joseph Limo, MP Kipkelion East, and the chair of this committee on finance and national planning. All right, it's good that you have come today. It has been a while. I remember, I think last year we have invited you to address several issues. It was not possible to have you in the last session, and today we have you here. As per the invitation by the National Assembly, the clerk, National Assembly, you are invited here to cover several issues. Of course, your central bank is a very, very important body in management of both monetary policy and the national debt issues, and therefore there are several issues which we need to cover together, and therefore some of the issues which we call you today to cover is monetary policy regarding the national debt level and management. Of course, there is also the status of some banks. I remember the last engagement we had, we were discussing the issues around Chase Bank and Imperial Bank receiverships. Yeah, so the status, we need to know the status. And then, of course, there is also the implementation of Section 33C of the Banking Act, which was amended through Finance Bill 2018. And finally, the effects of the recently issued prudential guidelines, which we want to hear from you, because you are the key player in the monetary policy issues in this country. So, Mr. Governor, I think without going beyond that, I want to give you this chance so that you can now cover the issues which we have listed here together. I think before, there was a time you were supposed to come and you did send a statement regarding the status, but it is good that now that you are here, you will still cover the status of the bank's receiverships, together also with the monetary policy regarding the national debt and its management. So, Governor, the chance is yours now. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, honorable members, I'm delighted to appear before this Parliamentary Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning. And I'm grateful to you for the flexibility you allowed in arranging this meeting. At the outset, Chair and members, I want to make 3 quick points. The first is to acknowledge the letters that I received in the recent past requesting me to appear before the committee. Of course, I want to again restate our desire to meet you, only that our scheduling did not allow this to happen, as we indicated in our replies. And in our recent reply, I did indicate that our desire to come and meet you quickly as soon as we could. And therefore, here we are, honorable members, and At this point, we are prepared to address all the concerns that, Chair, you raised. And kulingana na methali, mgeni njoo mwenyeji apone. The second point I would want to assure honorable members is that the central bank serves the public interest. Everything we do is in according to its mandate, ultimately for the prosperity of all Kenyans. On these specific questions that we will raise, we are responding to the current challenges, which are not only national but global. These are the terrorism, money laundering, and corruption, and whose consequences are dire. A third point I would want to make at the outset, Chair, is that we serve always and everywhere in accordance with the Constitution and all applicable laws. Nevertheless, a collaborative effort with our bodies is called for. In particular, we appreciate the National Assembly's role and welcome its support. As you mentioned, Chair, we did send you, in my reply, some answers to 2 of the questions that were in your letter. And this concerns the debt and monetary policy, and indeed also about the 2 institutions that still are in receivership, that is Imperial Park and Chase Bank. We submitted those detailed document answers, but Chair, if you wanted, at the end of this, we could obviously cover that ground again. It's perfectly in order. But today at the beginning in this presentation, I want to cover the remaining 2 issues, which is really Section 33C of the Banking Act, that is the recent amendment to the Banking Act, how the central bank has acted to implement it, the difficulties in implementing this amendment, and what is at stake. I will also explain the background to the CBK circular on large cash transactions. And you'll see that as never before, we are looking over the edge of an abyss. The economy has taken many blows over the years and proved resilient. This one, though, would be self-inflicted. So now I begin the presentation, and Chair, I'll run reasonably quickly, but it's only 10 slides, and these have been circulated to you. So I want to begin by making the point that on October 1 in 2018, following the coming in force of Section 65 of the Finance Act, the Banking Act was amended to include a new Section 33C. And in one stroke, Kenya was on the brink of rolling back key instruments in the fight against corruption, money laundering, and financing of terrorism, which would have brought to naught the hard-fought gains over the recent years. Now, the amendment refers directly to cash transactions, but has far-reaching implications. There's a summary of it on the first slide, page 1. And on this slide, you'll see that the Section 33C of the Banking Act became effective on October 1. And really, in summary, what this required was the central bank to develop regulations that would prescribe or regulate the deposits and withdrawals, bank deposits and withdrawals. Now, the regulations, as per that amendment, should have been developed within 30 days. So that is by October 31. And also another element in this amendment was that no other person other than central bank can issue regulations on deposit and withdrawals. Now, all the existing guidelines and regulations on deposits and withdrawal by customers would become null and void within 14 days of the coming into force of the regulations made under Section 33C. And the last point in this amendment was that preparing these regulations should comply with the requirements of the Statutory Instrument Act of 2013. So that, in summary, is what the amendment captured. How then has CBK acted to implement this amendment? Well, we have acted to implement the amendment, but we first saw the amendment after it had become effective, but embarked on understanding and implementing it. To be clear, CBK had not been aware or otherwise consulted in formulating the amendment, so we had no lead time. On the second slide, you will see the current status. That is slide number 2. And as soon as it became implemented, we consulted we commenced developing the indicated regulation and encountered significant difficulties. We therefore consulted with the Attorney General, as one would expect working in the administration. We consulted with the Attorney General on October 26, 2018. At the same time, we have yet to hear from the Attorney General. We did not get a response from the Attorney General, but that was overtaken by events because on November 30th, a civil rights group sued the National Assembly and the Attorney General on this amendment through the High Court in a petition number 426 of 2018. Central Bank was enjoined in the suit as an interested party. Now, the case has already begun, and meaning the process, the judicial process, and it is scheduled for hearing on March 29th of this year. I'll come back to this as I proceed with the presentation. The initial objective, dear members, was to gather in one place all the regulations concerning cash and deposit withdrawals. And we faced significant difficulties right away. One of these is obviously the stipulated timelines. These were impossible. The existing regulations just could not be brought together, reviewed by the public, reviewed by the Attorney General, then brought to Parliament, and then made effective all within 30 days. In fact, theoretically, it takes a minimum of 90 days to do all this. But in practice, recent legislations have taken 1.5 years or more. In the circumstances, we therefore sought the Attorney General's guidance, as I mentioned a moment ago. Why is it impossible to implement the amendment? What difficulties really arise? And I would ask members to look at slide number 3, which shows some of the difficulties. The first of this is that a variety of requirements in the Banking Act and other laws on deposit and withdrawals would need to be wrapped into the new proposed regulations. And for instance, this relates to even things like consumer protection, or for that matter, other notices that banks may give or the central bank may issue from time to time. The amendment also attempts to override other requirements on deposits and withdrawal that may be set by banks for their customers in terms and conditions. For instance, think about the ATM limits that we have. I mean, that is a cash withdrawal, and you need to have that wrapped in also in the proposed regulations. Or, for instance, even the hours of accessing banks, which are all elements that constrain how a customer, how, when, and how much a customer withdraws from their accounts or relates to a bank. There are also other requirements, and in particular, the amendment would conflict with the amendment would conflict with the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is an important pillar in the fight against money laundering and combating financing of terrorism. Another point, of course, that is important is we also are signatories to the United Nations Treaty. And therefore, there are things there, for instance, there are resolutions of the United Nations Security Council that we adhere to, and we need to adhere to. So from time to time, we do get those resolutions, and they do constrain, some of them constrain the cash withdrawal of specific individuals or others. So the point here is that all those things, if we were to follow the spirit and the letter of Section 33C, would need to be wrapped into the proposed regulations. Of course, there are other considerations, but the point here is that it does not also assure us of strengthening the safety and soundness of bank transactions, which is important for us, as we'll explain later. So, members, at this point, it became clear to us that implementing the regulation was impossible, and that's why we appealed to the Attorney General to show us a way forward. And now, as I have explained, we have come to the point where we have tossed the matter or brought the matter forward to the judiciary for determination. Members, I want to move to a section that I think is important in understanding where we are. And this is with regard to the effect our anti-money laundering and combating of financing of terrorism framework, AML-CFT for short. So can I describe this framework for Kenya? Yes, but before doing that, maybe what I would need to do is to explain that for us in Kenya, we remain vulnerable to risks from money laundering and the financing of terrorism by virtue of our location. We know how we are located, the geography and the other, who are our neighbors and the oceans and things like that. Our advanced financial sector, we are much more advanced, so there are a lot more things that can happen quickly and so forth. That we are a cash-based economy. A lot of transactions do take place in cash. And of course, there are a lot of there are instances of the underlying predicate crimes. That is things relating to, of course, the corruption, let's say, or for that matter, things related to smuggling and things like that. So to set the stage, I do need to explain the basic tenets of an effective anti-money laundering AML-CFT framework. And really, there are 6 pillars on this, or 6 specific tenets. And just to move through it quickly, the objective of the overall framework is to protect the financial sector from abuse. And an effective framework strengthens the sector's integrity and that illicit funds do not flow through the financial sector. So the tenets are, or they include a robust KYC, know your customer framework, and due diligence measures by the institutions, in this case banks and so forth. Monitoring of transactions, this robust way of monitoring transactions. A mechanism to report large cash transactions. Record keeping is very important, particularly after you spotted something and you do need to look back and see how that took place in the past. And of course, criminalization of money laundering and terrorism. Now, Kenya has sought to apply these tenets according to international best practices. And it is important to note that the global standard setter in AML-CFT is the FATF. This is a global body that sets the standards here. And Kenya committed to global AML-CFT standards in 1998. We can now move to slide number 5, which describes in summary the elements of Kenya's AML-CFT framework. Now, I don't want to go through every part of it, but it's important to mention that this is really, it has many facets, and an important one is the POCAMLA, which is the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, and its regulations. And this, as you see, were put in place in 2010 and 2013. There is also the Prevention of Terrorism Act in 2012 and its regulations for 2013. There is the Banking Act. There is also the prudential guidelines on the proceeds of crime, and also combating the financing of terrorism. This was in 2013. And then there is the Banking Circular number 1 of 2016, which gave additional guidelines on large cash transactions. Of course, in all this, you also have the periodic United Nations Security Council resolutions, which we also strive to adhere to and tell the institutions, advise the various institutions appropriately. I want you, there's an annex, which is on Annex 2, which shows you the specific situation in Kenya. It shows the listing by the FATF, that's the Financial Action Task Force, of, in 2012, countries that were on the gray list and those that were on the black list. And you can see Kenya then was on the gray list, meaning it was non-corp, well, as defined in the gray list is, it had some deficiencies, AML-CFT deficiencies, and that we had developed an action plan with the FATF, but the issue there was the FATF thought that we were not committed to the action plan, and therefore we were being monitored appropriately. But as you can see, we satisfied them, and in 2018, the latest list, Kenya is not in the gray list, and nor is it in the black list. And I wanted this to be, this also, Chair, I have tabled it as an annex for our presentation. So we move now to cash monitoring, and I want us to move now to slide number 6. Cash monitoring is essential, as we mentioned a moment ago, also because criminals performing illicit activities prefer using cash. And there are certain requirements for large cash transactions. As I said before, the POCAMLA provides for reporting of all cash transactions above the specified threshold. The specified threshold is US dollars 10,000 or equivalent, and this is specified in the 4th schedule of that POCAMLA. And then there are other considerations in terms of reporting of suspicious transactions, but also all transactions above US dollars 10,000. Then there is the Central Bank of Kenya Banking Circular number 1, which is what members you wanted us to, you had a question about. And I would say that the majority of suspicious transactions are generally triggered by unusually large cash transactions. That's the first thing. If there is a large cash transaction, unusually large, vis-a-vis the client or the person, the depositor or the transactor, that leads or should lead to suspicious transaction reporting, or for that matter, greater scrutiny on that transaction. Now, our circular of 2016, dear members, reminded banks of the requirements under POCAMLA. And it, in particular on large cash transactions, and this related, included reminding them that they need to determine the legitimacy of funds. Now, we put together the circular based first and foremost on the findings that we had seen in the context of targeted inspections that had revealed that corruption proceeds had been transacted through large cash transactions. There was also the other element, which is we saw failure by institutions to obtain information to determine legitimacy of customer transactions. Further, we looked at other international best practices on large cash transactions, and indeed also did a comparative study on how other jurisdictions treat large cash transactions. And so we actually did a rather detailed study, And I would want to submit as Annex number 1 some of the material that we put together. It shows you the countries, it shows you the amounts relating to how they deal with large cash transactions. We did look at it specific to ourselves as well. But I think the point I wanted to assure members is the detail with which we followed we studied, we analyzed the practices in other countries. And again, that is Annex number 1, which I also submit along with the presentation. What is the impact of circular number 1 of 2016? The circular, as I mentioned, is part of measures to enhance the effectiveness of monitoring cash transactions. As explained, monitoring each cash transaction is an essential pillar of an effective AML-CFT framework. The question is, what fraction of our population are affected by this requirement? First, less than 0.7%, less than 0.7% of all bank accounts in Kenya have a balance of 1 million shillings or above. So 99.3% of bank accounts in Kenya have less than 1 million. So in that sense, they are capable of transacting below that threshold. Maybe putting it differently, less than 0.7% of our bank accounts can transact above 1 million. So in terms of drawing down and all things like that. So already you can see the numbers are quite small. So this isn't even 90%, it's 99.3%. Secondly, most customers can immediately answer the necessary questions. Nevertheless, innovations by banks, and this is what we are pushing them, can simplify the process further. And I think this is something that we are working with banks, not in a static way, but in a sort of a dynamic way, such that they can improve, make it easier, and make it more customer-friendly, that edifice in terms of the requirements in terms of the answers or questions that are put for you. But what would happen, dear members, if we remove this pillar? Would it not lead to all the money in the matrices and in foreign safe havens coming back to our banking system? Governor, hakuna pesa mashinani. Isn't this the way to deal with it? Allow all that money to come back. And dear members, this is a false hope. What is certain is the AML-CFT framework would collapse. The consequences would be severe and immediate. I would ask you to look at slide number 7. And the first thing here, Chair and members, is that we expect a significant adverse impact on the banking sector. There will be termination of relationships of foreign correspondent banks and closures of accounts of Kenyan banks, meaning we would be de-risked. That's a turn of the trade, being de-risked. And regional links of Kenyan banks would be adversely affected. Basically, we would be cut off from the rest of the global financial system. Now, Kenyan banking sector would also be blacklisted internationally. And the country will most likely be blacklisted by the FATF. As if that's not enough, our banking sector would be perceived as risky and less attractive to investors, and obviously would lead to and risk significant concerns like collapsing and threatening the financial stability. Last but not least, the war against corruption would have been lost resoundingly. Kenya would have become a safe haven for money launderers, terrorists, and also the hub of other illicit flows. Those are the consequences in the banking sector.
Bwana Governor,
Yes.
just is a sort of a point of order, because you know when you are talking, you are talking to Kenyans. You just put off your mic first, and therefore, as a chair of this committee, I want you to present it in the right perspective, because you know the way you have now put that the amendment has the following impact on the banking sector is actually complete, inaccurate, and it is misleading information to the public. This parliament does not work to kill the economy. It is the work of parliament to legalize all the processes which are in this country. It has come to my attention from your last presentation, the slide number 7, that there is complete misunderstanding, and that is why, Mr. Governor, we have always wanted engagement with you, because we had a feel that there is complete misunderstanding between yourself and the banking sector in terms of the amendment. The amendment at no point does it point that you remove the regulations and the prudential guidelines which is governing the way we operate in this country. It is actually trying to help you, and I have to put it to you very clearly that the regulations you are, and the memos you are issuing to banks on how to deal with these illicit flows of money have no full force of the law. So what the amendment is doing is requiring you to develop those which comply with all the international requirements. But this parliament has a responsibility to ensure those regulations are given the full force of the law by following the Statutory Instrument Act. You forward them to parliament, then we legalize them so that if there is any breach of those regulations you are putting across, then the courts in Kenya can actually use it to even imprison, put somebody into prison that you did not follow the following. Now, if your regulations, the way it is now, or your memos, or your circulars, are not complied with by the banks, I can tell you, no court in this country will prosecute a bank manager who did not follow your circular, because it doesn't have the full force of the law. So what the amendment is saying, the central bank to come up with the regulations and bring to parliament for us to legalize. But what we have seen, you have actually gone by and fought the amendment without understanding, Mr. Governor, because the understanding here, which I want to put across to you, because is a point of information to you, so that as you are presenting, you put that particular, this slide number 7 to the right perspective, that the Kenyans should be listening, that our amendment will never, and it will never, Mr. Governor, support all these kind of things which you are purporting, that it will actually reverse the gains which we have done. In fact, we are helping you. We are legalizing your memos. In fact, they are not regulations. Your circulars. Bring them to this house. These members are being given the constitutional mandate to legalize, because you know, when you are making those memos, you are actually doing legislation outside parliament. Yeah. So that is, so I want to put it very clear, so that this particular slide, you must put it to the right perspective, because you see these Kenyans are watching you and they are listening to you, and we don't want a situation where this the central bank will be quoted as having said Parliament wants to reverse again. So I did not want to cut before we finish, but because it's a serious issue, I can see some members are agitated already. I hope you are actually concentrating on the legal path of it.
Chairman,
Yes, Mheshimiwa Atandi.
thank you, Chairman, for your intervention. We are following keenly the presentation by the Governor, and we have taken note of some of his presentations. I want to plead with you that we give him the opportunity to finish, and then now we can be able to interrogate him based on the presentation.
Yes, you're right, Mheshimiwa Atandi. But I did not want a situation where he continues putting a wrong perspective to the country, and then we can now come and start now doing the other round. But now, go on, you finish. But I put it in the right perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments, advice, and thank you, members, for allowing me to continue. Just one thing, I will come back to the question that the Chair raised just now, later in the presentation. So let me quickly move on to the remaining part of my presentation. One of the things that also has come up is the consequences with regard to the economy. I have mentioned just now the adverse impact on the banking sector, and this is according to our best judgment as the central bank. And we have significant information that would indicate why our judgment lands in this area. But in terms of the consequences, this would also be felt, in our estimation, in every corner of our country, by every citizen. And this is in slide number 6. There are 3 elements here. The effects of the amendment, I guess it's slide number 8, slide number 8. The effects of the amendment of the economy will be devastating. First, we know we will have problems in terms of impaired ability to detect terrorism financing. This is our estimate. And we all are very conscious of what happened last month in January 15th, where indeed, where we lost 21 innocent lives due to a terrorist attack in our own nation. Then the other issue is we will have an inability to transact with the rest of the world. External transactions will be inhibited. You will not be able to send or receive money from outside the country except under very stringent conditions. And the point again here is that blacklisting and being unplugged from the global financial sector, financial system, would have implications on things that we take for granted, including, for instance, inability to use our credit card for international transactions, travel, payments for schools, fees, medical fees, and others. All that will become impossible. Finally, and the last point on the slide, is the impact on the economy would also be severe. Really, the Golden Bag scandal, from our perspective, is a good cautionary tale. As we know, despite the best intentions that the architects put forward, the Golden Bag scandal devastated the economy to the weakest we've ever been. We know, for instance, GDP growth fell to the lowest in the entire history of our country. Inflation surged to an all-time record of 61.5% in January 94. Treasury bill rates rose to a record 85% in July 93. Exchange rate depreciated by 143% between December 91 and December 93. The banking sector weakened, and as we all know, we had several banks collapsed. Finally, and an important reminder on this, is the poor and vulnerable were hit the hardest as the price of essential commodities rose significantly. Dear members, allowing illicit funds to move back freely to the formal financial sector will have comparable effects. So where are we now? And I would ask you to move to slide number 9. And I'm now coming to a close. Slide number 9, really we are at step number 2, where already in step number 1, we identified those difficulties. And in terms of implementing the Act, the Section 33C of the Banking Act. And now, as I said, there is a case before the High Court, and it will allow the interpretation to be determined, allow an interpretation. And as we know, the case before Parliament has as first respondent the Attorney General, and the National Assembly is the second respondent, while the Central Bank is the first interested party. Now, the High Court, under its jurisdiction, will determine the matter and give an interpretation. All parties have already filed their submissions, and the matter is scheduled for hearing on March 29, 2019. So once the determination is made, we do want, even before that, to engage with Parliament and the public on possible ways to continue refining this matter of how deposits and withdrawals are done in the banking sector. The last slide just summarizes the key messages. Without going through all of them, I would only make the point that if indeed we, in our estimation, Chairman and dear members, the amendment strikes at the heart of Kenya's AML-CFT framework and our anti-corruption efforts. And indeed, the CBK circular that you mentioned is part of an effort to enhance the effectiveness of cash monitoring, which is an essential part, an essential facet of an effective AML-CFT framework. Now, the war against corruption, dear members, money laundering, and terrorism financing will be impaired if indeed the requirements on cash withdrawal and deposits are weakened. And I just explained what the economic consequences could be. Finally, as we have made this point, it would happen, as has happened in other jurisdictions, that Kenya would be locked out of the global financial system, and this would have adverse impact for all of us. That's my presentation, dear members, on Section 33 and 33C of the Banking Act, and also on the CBK Circular number 1 of 2016. If you don't mind, I could just mention a few things. One, in summary, the issue about debt, and also the issue about the two outstanding banks that are in receivership. Just briefly, Chair, okay, and then we'll move on.
Chair, there's a point about a preliminary issue before we proceed. If you allow, preliminary.
Members, it is actually the view that is better that it touches those issues, because you know what happens is at the moment we open up, it will actually be very difficult maybe for the governor to go back to his presentation well. Yeah. Okay, all right. This is the engagement. Yeah, so, Mr. Governor, I think, yeah, you touch those other issues so that once we go back to questions, then we finish all of them.
Chair, just very briefly on the debt and the question about monetary policy with regard to national debt level and things like that. I think there are only a few points I want to make here. First, in terms of the size of public debt, and this, as of last December 2018, was 5,272 billion, so 5 trillion really, and this is equivalent 5272.5 billion, so it is 5 trillion. Yes, is that correct? And 5.2 trillion, 5.2 trillion. And this is equivalent to 56.6% of GDP. That is really the number in terms of the magnitude. And I think the only point here is that, yes, we have made the point that there is scope for improvement in the, or should we say, the reorganization of public debt portfolio. But an important element, which is to refinance existing debt, some of the existing debt, with longer and cheaper debt. But again, this is a standard operation in terms of reorganizing one's debt. But importantly, the dynamics of national debt need to be anchored on the fiscal consolidation. And members recently, and indeed at the point of considering various measures that actually will lead to a sort of an improvement in this path, meaning by consolidating, by having a lower deficit, as it were. That is the first indicator of the positive dynamics beginning to emerge. So that is a point we wanted to make. Thirdly, we wanted to make the point that fiscal consolidation will have significant positive impact, not only on the point I mentioned about debt, but also more generally on macro stability, which in particular will allow us to have a less stringent, or should we say, a more accommodative monetary stance. So that is really the point that we wanted to make. In terms of the two institutions that are still in receivership, we have Chase Bank and also Imperial Park. With regard to Chase Bank, I think members know that in August last year, a portion of assets and liabilities were carved out and taken over by SBM Bank Kenya, and that allowed the depositors 75% of their deposits. It gave them access to 75% of their deposits in SBM. This, as we have said before, is a first for Kenya. But I think importantly, it provided much needed relief to the depositors. It's true there's still the 25% that still remains in Chase Bank, which remains in receivership. And the idea there is to accelerate as much as we can the recovery of outstanding debt and other assets other assets of CBL, so that we can actually provide money or resources to the depositors and indeed other creditors. Finally, on Imperial Bank, the point to make there is that we announced sometime in December that we have an agreement with, we have accepted a binding offer from KCB Bank, which would take a portion, again, of deposits and also some assets, which would then allow depositors in Imperial Bank a portion or access to a portion of their resources. And that now, the point also at that point was that KCB needed to finalize some due diligence work, which we expected it to be finalized by the end of March, which would then give concrete answers to amounts and percentages. So that work is ongoing. And finally, as we know, the depositors did get a disbursement in December, amounting to 12.7% of their deposits, which now was provided to them in the period towards the end of last year, early this year. So in a nutshell, those are the main points I wanted to make. I am obviously with my team ready to answer any of your questions and look forward to answering them completely. Thank you very much, dear members. Thank you, Chair.
All right, members, I know there are a lot of questions, but before we start, I remember that Honorable Mulele had a serious issue. Then we will come now to every member, and we will limit at least one question and very brief so that we move on. Yeah, but before that, I would like us to put into the right perspective first the issue of what we were doing and what the governor has understood. I think there is a complete disconnect between the two. Yes, Mheshimiwa Mulele. All right, I think Mheshimiwa Mulele has pronounced himself, but at least members, let us not take that route of is too long. But I want to ask this way, members. I know the questions you are asking. First, before you ask questions, members, you know there is a disconnect. There is a I don't know whether I'm the only one who is saying that the governor has come here believing that we have made the law to actually remove the regulations they have made. But we have made a law To do what? To require that you bring those memos we legalize. So that if country like Malaysia, for instance, have relied on the memos given by central bank, and Kenya chooses to say these memos, we convert them to regulations and you take them to parliament, Kenya will be ranked higher than those countries. Not the other way around you are saying. That is my opinion. Mheshimiwa Atandi,
Chairman,
then
you are right.
KK, then Dawood.
Chairman, you are right.
Yes, then Shakir.
Chairman, you are right in your
Yes.
observation. But, Mr. Chairman, I think the CBK governor appeared before us to give us a lecture. And I want to tell him that this committee of parliament consists of members who are well educated on matters finance, economics, and banking. We needed not to be lectured on what is happening, because that is what I've observed. But my point is this: I have, Mr. Chairman, please protect me, because I have a right to give my views.
Mheshimiwa Atandi, Mheshimiwa Atandi, please do not invite the wrath of the members.
Chairman,
just go straight to the point.
Chairman, my question is this.
Yes, Jimmy Angwenyi.
I want to ask.
All right, your point
Chairman,
is taken.
Chairman, thank you, Elder. Chairman, I want to ask the governor.
Go straight to the point. Yes.
I want to ask the governor two questions. Mr. Governor, are there existing regulations concerning cash deposits and withdrawals? If there are, where did they come from? Do they have the authority or the force of law for those regulations to operate? And my last question, Mr. Chairman, is because it is very clear that you have refused to implement the law. Would I say that, should I not conclude that you are not an obedient servant of this country? Because you are blatant. You are given the law, you refuse to implement, and you are coming to tell us that the reason why you did not implement the law is because you thought that if the law is implemented, then the country would be exposed.
This is totally unacceptable.
Chairman, you have to protect me from members. If you have self-interest in this matter, please come out. But I have my right to represent my people.
It's a very good meeting. Let us not introduce side shows. Let us allow our to finish.
Let members who have self-interest in this issue to come out and declare, because I am asking questions which I believe are right as a member of this House. Yes, and Chairman, would I not therefore conclude that the CBK leadership, led by the governor, is incompetent to serve this country?
Let us limit our questions. And I'm asking members, let us be orderly. Let us allow other members to ask in silence. You'll have time to clarify what you want to say. Mheshimiwa KK.
Mr. Chair, my issue is about the issue of debt management of this country. And when I listen to the presentation of the governor saying that you have a debt of 5.27 trillion shillings, and saying that we expect that this would go lower over the years, saying that the budget deficit this year will go down by 6.3%. And I'm looking at the laws that we passed last year, for example, the finance bill. There were taxes that were proposed, that were passed in this house, that were supposed to ensure that we collect more revenue as a country so that we bridge this deficit. But some of those taxes, for example, the presumptive tax, is yet to be collected. When you tell us that we expect that we expect to raise more revenues over the years, this has been the same narration that has been done to this assembly. Every time the central bank and treasury comes to make a presentation, we expect that our revenues are going to go higher. However, Mr. Chair, there is no a single time that I remember we have accomplished that revenue raising as a country. So this, therefore, statement by this governor, I find it misleading and erroneous that we are going to bridge this and I'm saying that as a youth of this country because we are the one who is inheriting this debt. 56.6% debt of a GDP is unacceptable, and the measures that the central bank governor tells us are going to reduce this debt, I don't think they are workable.
Mheshimiwa Dawood. Boni? Or Shabir, eh? Shabir, then Boni, all right? Yeah, just allow Shabir.
Let's follow the
Yeah,
procedure.
quickly.
Yes, thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to suggest that the limitations of 1 million have had a tremendous effect on Juakali and the other cash businesses that have been going along in this country, which are not 0.07 as you are saying. They are cumulative. It's not that they have 1 million shillings in their bank at any one time. It is the transactions that they continue and they works on a volume of trade. The way we have no problem is what you're doing, it's the way it is being done. And now you see what you're trying to suggest here, and I agree with you, that if the body itself, if you have a growth on your toe and your heart is weak, you cannot have that operation of your toe without affecting the whole body. We accept that premise you're putting, but there are other ways of trying to sort this out. You have said that they will do it voluntarily as well. The banks have taken advantage of some of these things and have really harassed not only 180, but even us, to get simple money out. The other issue that we have to say to you, that when you've said this is voluntarily, how come that Diamond Trust and other banks at KCB and others have flouted this particular rule, and you have said quietly, not doing anything about it, only for the DPP to come in and take action. On the issue of Imperial Bank, I am going to suggest the same thing, that there are criminals who have taken money and they are shareholders and you know them and they have been with you and they have bribed your own branches and your own offices and bribed them silly. And you're sitting down and talking to these guys as if they are investors and whatever. I'm sorry about it, but it's a fact.
Mheshimiwa Shabir, you know, just hold on. You know, as much as your point is good, but let us ensure we use parliamentary language.
But it is, I'm saying bribed is a parliamentary language.
No, there is
silly.
There is a word which you use.
Silly, I said silly. Yeah. Silly is a parliamentary language.
It's not allowed. It's abusive.
I will withdraw silly, but listen,
right,
bearing in mind.
Okay, thank you, Mheshimiwa. You have withdrawn. Mheshimiwa Mboni, then Jimmy Angwen.
That our public debt is 47% of GDP. Today, Governor tells us it's 56. Now, these are two institutions which we have entrusted to manage our fiscal and monetary policies. Last week, the control of budgets, they also stated that we are using 1.2 trillion to service our debts. From other quarters, Treasury, they are saying we are using 700 billion to service our public debts. Is it that really they don't know what is happening, how much we are using to service our public debts? Because this country, we are already strained. You can see we are facing a lot of cash flow in the economy. But we are not getting the right figures from the two institutions. Can the two institutions go and sit down and reconcile the figures and come and tell us, tell the public, tell Kenyans, how much are we using to service public debts? Thank you, sir.
Right, Mheshimiwa Jimmy Angwen. Yeah, then Kandia, then we go back to Will.
interest rates are low. Why are we not borrowing from Japan, which has got the negative interest rate, if that was or even Germany, which have got negative interest rates? And finally, if we cannot pursue those people who destroyed the Imperial Bank, we might actually be encouraging the people in the National Bank of Kenya to go in that direction.
Yeah, yes. Mheshimiwa Kandiev, and then we give the governor to respond, then we go the next round. Please. Bwana Governor, please respond to those questions. But as you respond, Mr. Governor, you know, there is one thing which should be very clear in our mind. And I don't know why you are, whether you are understanding what we are saying. At no point did these members, when they were coming up with the law, say that, you know, we don't want that perception where Parliament will be seen to be fighting the regulations you are doing. We are partners, and we are mandated by the Constitution to legalize any process which is being done by other Kenyans, including yourself. And therefore, can you put it in the right perspective so that when you are answering, you should be in one understanding that if you have an issue with how it will be implemented, but the understanding should be, we are saying the regulations which you have should be strengthened through statutory instrument act process, so that when you are now asking the banks to follow, it is a legal process. We are not saying that, you know, that is why once we understand each other, those lights which you are saying the impact on the economy will not arise. They are null and void, because, you know, that is not the intention, that we remove your regulations. We are helping you to legalize them.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I will respond to your questions. I want to begin with a point that maybe I went very quickly over. Right at the beginning, I did make the point that we really welcome and appreciate the role of the National Assembly. And we do understand that in terms of its responsibilities, in terms of how it does business, and really supporting our work as well. So I think that point is well taken, Mr. Chairman. But I think in terms of the specifics, it is true we operate and have been operating, as I said also in my opening statement, according to all the laws that are applicable to us. At no time, dear members, did we decide that we will not obey, or for that matter, we will not follow through on a particular piece of legislation. At no time. If we have issues with a particular thing, the specific approach is to go and query it like any other institution. And I think the point here is that the vehicle there is through the channel is through the Attorney General, and then through the legal process. That is how we have dealt with it. And dear members, that is how we dealt with this particular question that is before us. But in particular, that's the overview. In particular, yes, there was the point that we could have come in earlier when the law was still being discussed. As a matter of fact, we didn't know the law was being discussed. We didn't know. We didn't know. And the time we found out about it is after assent has come through, and in effect, that the thing is about to be implemented. At that point, we have no choice but to implement the law. We have no choice, unfortunately. We would have wanted to have had a robust conversation with yourselves at the beginning while you are discussing it. Then maybe, Chairman, the point you are raising about how to help us, we could have told you how we want to be helped better. And how did we make our life more, let's say, effective, and indeed, what are the things that could improve the way we do business? Unfortunately, we were not allowed that, because of the timing. So when it became clear that the law on October 1 had become effective, remember again the timing of the amendments that the Finance Act puts forward is defined in the Act as well. There are some that take 3 months, others, but this was from October 1. And so at that point, we had no choice but to go ahead with implementing it. And that's when it became very clear that this law contradicted many other laws, and indeed it was impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, the point is that it was impossible. It is true you can give us a law to implement, but if it is impossible to implement, we cannot implement. In a sense, it is an implementable law, so it is unimplementable. And that is the issue. So no matter how much we try to do it, to implement it, we will fall on our face. And that is really the issue. Now, why did we take our time to go to the Attorney General, as was asked? Why is it that we only wrote to the Attorney General towards on October 26, as I mentioned? As a matter of fact, what we did is we went directly to him right after the law, we were aware of the law, meaning we held meetings. I didn't indicate the sort of interaction that takes place, and you can imagine that happened from the first week. And that is really the point. But at the end of it, of course, we thought of various options that were available then, and that could have been available to us. But towards the end of the month, it became clear that the only way forward is formally requesting his opinion, and then have a legal determination in a particular way. What then happened is we got sued, or rather National Assembly got sued, and indeed we were enjoined, and the Attorney General got sued in this matter. And therefore, now we are ready to sort of resolve the matters, all aspects, and indeed we will be discussing, and National Assembly has already made its submission to the courts, because at the end of the day, the courts have a responsibility to determine when there are these differences of law. And frankly, as we all know, the courts have in the past had instances where they have actually struck out certain laws that were passed by this House. So in that sense, we did what we should have done, which is to appeal to the legal process. And that, I think, is according to the options that are available to us, and indeed also appreciating the responsibility of Parliament. As you know, we don't have an option of coming back to Parliament directly and sort of having that interaction. But now, of course, as we said, we will have that opportunity indirectly to cover other issues like the ones of refining the law and so forth. But I want to put it categorically that we did not choose to ignore the law. We did not. Honorable members, we did not ignore the law. The law was not implementable. So we did not ignore. We chose right at the beginning to go as fast as we can to implement it. But it became obvious that it was not implementable.
Madam Governor, just to interrupt you, you see, this particular law was very specific. It was very specific on regulation or on the memos you have issued to banks to govern deposits and withdrawals, which require certain things to be done, which will help Kenya be ranked among the many good ones who actually vet money coming in and going out. Now, when you consistently insist that it is not implementable, yet it is very specific that that particular regulation or memo should be legalized by you just copy and paste and bring it to Parliament for the purpose of legalizing. So you see, when you continuously insist that it is not implementable, you know, we are in the mind of people. They think it's a very big thing, but it is already in the bank. And you are implementing it in the bank, but we are saying bring it through bring it through Parliament, through the Committee on Delegated Legislation to be legalized per the Constitution, because the Constitution here under Article 94(5), probably, you know, so many other bodies outside, including even the one you are purported to have gone to court, as actually, even if you look at the papers, they have even given you in your file. They have quoted 94(5), but they have deliberately removed the word Parliament so that you continue misleading the public, that Parliament has no role. You see, according to 94(5) of the Constitution, it says no person or body other than Parliament has the power to make provision having the force of law in Kenya except under authority conferred by the Constitution or by legislation. And that particular legislation which is being referred to by the Constitution is the Statutory Instrument Act, which now allows that Parliament delegates its powers to you, but you bring it to that committee to be legalized. And that's what we are saying. What you are using to manage the withdrawals and deposits is okay. In fact, we want to be the best country in the world by ensuring that you will copy and paste and bring to that through that process. Now, you have actually decided to go the long route, and yet it is very clear that we want to legalize it so that you become one of the best. But I have seen in your mind, Mr. Governor, you are stuck to it, and we cannot allow you to mislead the public in this house that you have not chosen to ignore the law, but it is not implementable. And we have told you, bring that regulation to Parliament, we legalize it. What is difficult? You want to run your own country, according to what we are saying. Yeah, Vice Chair, then we give you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I can speak to the governor in Wajiko language. Wajiko language is not necessarily Kikuyu, but I have this to say, that the section 33 we registered in the Finance Act of 2018 simply requires you to consolidate your laws so that they can be compliant to the Statutory Instruments Act. By doing this, you will have helped, by bringing the regulations to Parliament, you will help Wajiko to say which among those regulations are oppressive. Wajiko will be able to say which one of those are not useful to her banking. You are being requested, you are being urged by this law to give the bankable Kenyans, your clients, people who use your services, a moment to interrogate your regulations, to interrogate your provisions and your requirements, so that as members of Parliament, we will sit down also and ensure that we pass them. But when you just sit on them and say that they are not implementable, it also shows you are stuck to that position, that it is an attitude problem. You are simply being told, bring those regulations, they be made compliant to the Statutory Instrument Act. And before I leave, Chair, I also request the Governor to tell us about Charterhouse Bank. They have gone silent on Charterhouse Bank. Keep us up to date.
All right, yeah. The Governor, you know, is finishing, eh? Yes, yes. Yes, Dawood.
Because I want the Governor, he just mentioned that civil society went to court and that's what they wanted. I want to ask him, did the Governor or the Central Bank sponsor the civil society to go to court?
Okay, Chair, may I respond?
All right. Yeah, what is it,
Mr. Chair, I think there is a disconnect between us and the Governor and the Central Bank. Actually, what you have just said, I don't think they have really taken it up. That all we needed is for them to bring their regulations so they can give it the force of law. That's all. We are not opposed to it.
Yes.
Okay.
And Bwana Governor, you know, the Constitution has actually put a lot of emphasis on public participation. The Kenyans who are customers in banks, you see, when you bring those regulations, those regulations will go through public participation. And in so doing, they will be legalized. But you see, when you do a loan, and you say it is not implementable to pass through the legal process, then it becomes another problem. Just go on.
Chair, thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, I will respond to all the questions that I missed in the first round. But before going to that, I want to first deal with the issue that has just popped up now about how we got to the High Court. It's not that we wanted. As a central bank, we do have, like any other entity in the institution, we can sue and be sued. That is clear. But the point is that this matter needed a legal determination. And while we were considering the options, we got sued. That's the correct way of putting it. So it's not that we sought to be sued, or rather, I can assure you, National Assembly did not seek to be sued. Or for that matter, the Attorney General did not seek to be sued. It would be kind of, exactly. So I think the point here is that this is what happened, and therefore we went ahead and protected ourselves, and we will, and I think National Assembly will also do this at the hearing, explain its position on all these things. But in terms of the only point I would make is that it's not that. I would want to insist that this wasn't a cut and paste approach, Chair, meaning we could cut and paste things that would then be brought to the Parliament, and in a sense blessed and moved on. And I think that is one point I want to be very clear about. The point, as I mentioned, is there are other laws that are also connected. And this needed to be brought in if that was the case. And that was the impossibility of it, Chair. Secondly, I wanted to make the point again, that is, we do understand the responsibility of Parliament in terms of making laws. But we also understand the responsibility of other institutions, and indeed ourselves as agencies and so forth, in having our sort of space in terms of implementing specific operational things. So I think that is the reason why the matter will be ventilated in court, and I really don't think I can proceed beyond here, except recognizing, and again I want to put that to be very clear on record in terms of the responsibilities of Parliament, and indeed the responsibilities of the central bank as put in the various laws. If you don't mind, I'll cover the other points quickly. So in terms of the implementation of the legislation, I don't think this is something that we can say was some misunderstanding on the part of the central bank's leadership, and I explained to members why is it that we went in a sequential way. seeking legal advice from the Attorney General and indeed where we are today. There were questions about the Imperial Bank, and if you don't mind, I'll cover all of them together. There is the issue which is there that, as was mentioned, that maybe some of the people that were involved in the collapse of this bank, criminals, according to, as members mentioned, are still, in a sense, loose and have not seen the inside of courts, and justice has not been brought. We've mentioned this before, but I want to be clear that we continue to pursue them. We've actually, we have a few cases that are still outstanding in the judicial process, and we will bring more as we finish some of those. But I think the point for us is, yes, we are looking forward to a quick, prompt resolution of these cases. As we understand it, some of the delay related to the petitions that were taking place. And so that did take some time, as we were advised by our counsel and so forth. But I think the point is well taken, that we cannot rest until those who are responsible are brought to book and they are made to account for the mistakes that they made. So that is quite clear. There is the question, again, about how we manage Imperial Bank. And I think the point here is we are moving to, as soon as we have clarity, which we hope will be in this next month, that is the month of March, we have clarity as to the details of the offer by KCB in terms of which assets and things like that they would be willing to take. Then we can decide on the residual assets. And I think the point you are making is some of the branches that are pending and so forth, or are not operating appropriately. So there is that element, and I think that is well taken. The concern is well taken because the concern, as we see it, stems from the depositor's plight. And I think that is something we want to conclude quickly going forward. There was the question about the transactions relating to, I guess, DTB and others. That's how you put it, the voluntary transactions. And I think the point I would make is simply that the investigations on the terrorist attack that we saw on January 15th are ongoing. And at this point, there has been, as the Director of Public Prosecution communicated yesterday, there has been significant information that has been put together on how this operation was financed. And it emphasizes, as you can imagine, the need for vigilance at all times with respect to our transactions. And I think this is the point that was being made by honorable members. So vigilance is important. Then there is the concern about complicit employees at all levels who may be aiding the criminal elements. That is a specific concern that also comes out. But at the same time, the third element here is appreciating the personal and institutional culpability. So for instance, if there's a particular employee who was complicit, then obviously that person will be held accountable. The institution as well, if they didn't have good systems or whatever else it is. But again, the point is that is specific to the mistakes that are done. So it shouldn't, in any way, we should separate the people from the culpability of the people and the institution. So that is important to make. Going forward, the investigations are following several leads, and they are connecting other intelligence, as you can imagine. And the role of all the concerned, for instance, the banks, or for that matter, ourselves, but everyone else, every single Kenyan, the role of all concerned is to support the investigators with all necessary information so that they can piece together the case. Obviously, timely information is critical in order to resolve this matter quickly. Then there was the questions about debt. this is, there are several problems well, maybe not problems, but there are several points I would make in terms of numbers. The problem with these numbers is that it's not so much the 46 or the 56, but it's rather what is the denominator and things like that. For instance, the 46 may be NPV terms, ours is on nominal terms. So there are all those differences where we are talking about the same debt, but you switch it in different ways and you get different numbers. And so your point is well taken. But it is important to make the point that there is no single number that captures every element of debt. You've mentioned things about the debt burden in terms of percentage of GDP. You've mentioned it in terms of service, debt service to revenues, debt service to exports. All those are indicators that we have. Bottom line, honorable members, is that yes, we are obviously working as the advisor to government with the National Treasury to understand and to help to support the objectives that we are putting forward, meaning we do need to bring down debt in a long-term way, in a sustainable way, so that we can have more resources released or available for other functions such as development functions and things like that. And dear members, you have been discussing one of the key elements of that, which is the budget, the expenditures and revenues, as was mentioned. I'm sorry, you have been seeing one element of that, as you have been discussing since you came back from your recess, the budget papers that are being presented for next year's budget. But I think the point here is that the details can be provided with Treasury on some of the elements of this debt. I will stop there. I may have missed one or two questions, but I think on the whole I have captured.
Something which was touched on Charter Bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Japan, I think Japan and the rest, I am not very sure whether there is negative interest. So let us allow him to finish, then we can come back.
Not us. Maybe you're not.
The governor members to finish what we had asked. Let us not make the questions also to be in futility, because we have to get answers. Yes, let's allow him to answer.
Okay. In terms, Chair, I did miss 2 points. The first is on negative interest rates. And this has been a very interesting time in the global financial markets where interest rates have been negative for several years. The point, though, is it's not just one dimension, which is interest rate, that matters. It's true interest rates are important, but I think there is the other element, which is the currency. So in a sense, we may be borrowing Japanese. Japanese yens, by the way, typically have had lower rates than, say, US dollars and things like that. And so, and you can imagine, for instance, when you think of samurai bonds and things like that, the rates are generally much lower than the Eurobond that, say, in the Eurobond market and things like that. But I think the point I would make is to just acknowledge that interest rate is one dimension, but the other dimension, and the other important dimensions are currency. So the currency composition of our debt is important, and also maturity. You find that in some markets, actually, you may have to, you cannot issue very long-term paper, as opposed to other markets where it is actually quite liquid and you can get you can issue long-term debt much longer term. We're talking 30 years and things like that. So your point is well taken, nevertheless. I think it is a concern when we look at debt management, we need to look at the entire package and not just one element. There was the question about Charterhouse, Chair, if you don't. Yes. So in terms of the mortgaging of your assets, I think I think you meant this in the context of the recent concerns that came up regarding KPA, Kenya Ports Authority. And this, I would actually say that as far as I understand it, we as Central Bank don't have the record of borrowing in terms of KPA, meaning the assets, or should we say the documentation that supports their borrowings and assets. So the only point we can make, we do have data on the overall numbers, right, which is what we were mentioning before. But in terms of the details, I think it's National Treasury that could explain that. But my understanding, nevertheless, is that any such consideration would only happen. I'm talking of when, let's say, the government is unable to make payments on a particular loan. And frankly, as we all know, the first point of call in the consolidated fund services is debt. So we would have to be in serious trouble. I mean, much more serious trouble if we ever had a problem in servicing our debt. And I think this is the point, the way Kenya has been managing its debt, that being the first point of call, in terms of the resources from our revenues or anywhere else, I would assure other lenders that and also the track record, would assure lenders that those extreme considerations are not that probable or very, very, very highly unlikely. The last point was Charterhouse, if you don't mind. Charterhouse, unfortunately, is yet another one of these issues that, or one of these cases that came to pass and has been stuck in the legal process for more than, I guess it's now, 15 years or something like that. And it is, the danger here, though, is as we get stuck in the legal process, the depositors have suffered. I have been receiving letters from depositors, and I read every one of them, because they are the ones that are suffering. We may be caught as central bank and the let's say, litigating parties in this sort of discussions, and the lawyers obviously are in the middle of that, and will go on for years and years and years, as has happened. But at the end of the day, the ones that suffer the most are the depositors. Now, having said that, I would also let members know that we are not sitting idle. We actually had a conversation with the CJ, the Chief Justice, again, trying to find ways that we can accelerate some of these processes so that we can bring the matter to conclusion, Charterhouse and a few other, let's say, outstanding cases that have been there for the benefit of the depositors and indeed for the benefit of the country. So that's what I can say now. I don't have any more positive news about this, but we are acting on it. We haven't forgotten it. Thank you, Chair.
All right, please let us be brief. Mheshimiwa Adipo, please be brief.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Bwana Governor, the 56.6% of GDP as a debt is a worrying point. But I just wanted to know some comparative information. Does World Bank or IMF has any recommendation of what ratio the debt should be in a country? That's my first point. And the second one is regarding the withdrawals and deposits. I know you have quite explained whatever you wanted to explain, But I'm not sure whether you are aware that some of the banks, and in particular, the Cooperative Bank, has put their own limit of withdrawal at 100,000 Kenya shillings. Now it happens we have our CDF money going there. And if they limit you to this, compared to the amount we receive quarterly, it means by the end of the 3 months, you will have not money to use that money you wanted to use. Now, this is one way where limitation and unreasonable limitation, like the Cooperative Bank is putting on us, really is
Yeah, I
killing
think
everything.
your point has
So
been
you
very
can,
clear, Mheshimiwa. I hope
you
that
can
is the
tell us.
last one. Mheshimiwa Edith, I'm fighting with time. Edith. Mheshimiwa, be loud enough unless you use the other one. Use that one, it's not loud. Can we finally hear a comment? I think maybe it looks like you said a comment from Kandie, Atandi, and then Boni. Quickly, please, members.
My question is, can I hear from the Governor, Central Bank, can he tell us the real economic growth of this country? The real, because we are getting some information from Treasury, which is not, when you go to the ground, you don't see. Okay.
Yes,
Chairman, thank you. I wanted to ask the Governor something on liquidity management. Governor, I understand that the interbank liquidity space is being dominated by a few Tier 1 banks. And you have many ways of managing liquidity in the market, one of which is CRR. CRR currently is at 5.25, and it has been at 5.25 since 2011, when the economy experienced one of our worst inflations. That time inflation was, I think, going at around 19 to 20%. Today, inflation is at around between 6 and 10. CRR rate is still constant at 5.25. I am asking this question because I know that the limited liquidity space is affecting the operations of small banks. There are some small banks that are unable to meet their obligations in the interbank space. I wanted you to tell us what you are doing to ensure that the small banks are also able to operate within that space, because if the small banks are not able to meet their obligations, I suspect that they might also experience those issues.
Point,
then the last question, Chairman, this is just the last one.
Please.
What is the role of CBK in addressing issues of corruption in government? I know that CBK is a banker of government. You make payments on behalf of governments to commercial banks and etc. Lately, I've seen that the payments, some of those illicit payments involving corruption have been released from CBK, but in turn, CBK rushes to commercial banks for accountability. What is your responsibility? Are you not the people involved in making payments? Do you check whether the government officers making payments are making genuine payments? Or how does it work? Please educate us. Thank you.
Bonnie, finally, I think Dawood, we had agreed you Yeah. Quickly, Mheshimiwa Boni, please, let not go the direction of Atandi. Dawood, finally.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the governor has been on record castigating interest rates. We want to know from him, there is a law in place. So what does he want us to do now that the law is in place? Has he got any proposal to probably modify it or do something so we understand where it's coming from? All right.
All right, finally, Governor, so that you answer together, we want to understand Central Bank. You know, I think there was a question by members here to the National Treasury. You know, when we are doing the budget policy statement or wherever we are doing budgets, we normally see the state departments, including MDAs. So the issue of Central Bank came up, and we want to understand your financing framework. Is the Central Bank getting any funding from Treasury at any time? All what you are doing and generating income, how do you dispose of your surpluses? Yeah, are you injecting the economy in one way or the other? We want to understand you. So maybe answer those other questions and finish with that one.
Chair, it's probably better to start with that because I have it now at the bottom of my... the central bank, unlike all other institutions that you just now mentioned, obviously its existence comes from the Constitution and has an act of Parliament that actually operationalizes it. In terms of its financing, this allows it to be independent in terms of its operation. So it is financed, it's not financed from, say, Treasury, the way, say, the judiciary is financed. It is financed by itself. And this is standard in terms of all central banks around the world. And if it were in any way, let's say, in any way constrained by other institutions, then that sort of independence would be thwarted. And that would be a significant problem in terms of discharging its mandate. So that is a long-standing situation. Of course, there is a standard, we are accountable also to Parliament, and that is very clear. Independence does not mean lack of accountability, that we fully understand. And as you know, we actually present our accounts on a regular basis. And most recent accounts for the last fiscal year, which were presented, were tabled to Parliament, were tabled here at Parliament and showed all our operations were clear in those accounts. In terms of the accounts, of course, they are audited. They are audited by the Auditor General, and but not only by himself, also helped by other institutions that are chosen appropriately in accordance to international best practices and so forth. So in terms of the financing framework, I think it is important to emphasize that the financing of our operations are generated internally. For instance, we do charge a fee for some of the transactions that we do undertake, including some of the debt management function that we do for government. Small fee, but that's exactly how it has happened. Now, in terms of is there any surpluses and things, how is that disposed? That is according to the CBK Act. The CBK Act is quite clear as to how that process takes place. And finally, indeed, part of it is used to finance our own operations, for instance, in terms of capital spending, but also if there is other specific project. But I think also we should be clear that at the end of it, there could also be a dividend transfer to Treasury. And this year, actually at the end of last year, we did present, or we did make a dividend transfer of 800 million Kenya shillings. And that is all clear. It's actually outlined in the finances, the financial accounts that were tabled in this House. So that's the background. In terms of other questions,
Mr. Governor, before you go there, you know, you have said there is a dividend you paid. Is a dividend the whole of it, the whole surplus, or you retain some surplus?
Chair, as I say, the rules on that are outlined in the CBK Act.
To which section? If you can
Well,
remember, but if you can't,
the section is somewhere like, if I'm not mistaken, is I want to say 35, but I may be mistaken. We can check it.
Of course, maybe because it is operational issue. You remember very well when you are determining the 800 million to be paid to the government.
Yes.
Was it, did you retain, let's say in the reserves, a bit of maybe, yeah, after carrying out all your operations, whatever remains, you remitted the government as a dividend, or you also retain some in the reserve?
I'm sorry, Chair. We don't work like a commercial operation where we retain. There's no such thing as retained earnings in the strict sense. So it is very clear. Every single shilling that we actually get in particular ways, we account for it. So there is no such thing as sort of we retain this just in case. So for instance, we did, in a sense, provide for certain operations that we are about to do, right? For instance, the capital operations. For instance, on the currency. These are all operations that are clear. They are also operations whose costs are well understood, and we provided for that. And it's on that basis that we also provided for increase in capital of about 20 billion, which we are desperate to have. So it is on that basis. These are pure financial decisions, and with clear transparency, and also with oversight, according to the law. And on that basis, we had 800 million that we transferred to the Treasury. So it is on that basis rather than we are going to send so much to the institution, or rather to the National Treasury, and all the rest we leave behind. It's actually the other way, which is every single shilling needs to be accounted for. If you don't mind, I could finish the other. Yeah.
Go on with the others.
Okay.
I hope you'll be very brief.
Maybe
Yes.
before I begin, did you want to say something about it?
I think we were just talking around the debt management, and I think debt management is a continual process. It never stops. Somebody was asking whether we're going to start looking at debt management. I think what we can say is that 56.6% number that we've given you is per the budget policy statement, September 2018. Domestic debt to foreign debt is 48 to 52% as we stand today. I think what's interesting is in 2018 we were able to make improvements. We extended the time, the maturity of debt, which was a big improvement when you look at the whole debt portfolio. And the other thing is we were able to embed a yield curve, which Kenya has not had in the past. We now have a stable yield curve around government debt. So I think what I would say to the National Treasury is please bear in mind that this is a continual management process. It does not stop at any one time. Thank you.
Thank you. The others, very quickly, the question about some banks having specific constraints, rules, and things like that. These are things, I think I'll throw this into the bucket of improvement in the refining the current arrangements with banks. So this is well taken, and I think this is something that we need to work with banks to make sure that the process is not in any way inhibited. After all, the resources are there, and if they are setting certain, let's say, limits, those should be easy for you to adhere to and so forth. So I think this is well taken. There was the two questions, or maybe three other questions. Corruption in government, your question about CBK, how do we support the anti-corruption efforts in government? It is true that we are the ones that operate the transmission, as it were, in terms of the national payment system, so-called the IB system, which even this parliament, in terms of its expenses, in terms of its requisitions through IFMIS and other places, will come to you through that system. And indeed, all 47 counties are supported through this. But the responsibilities in that are very clear. First, in terms of the individual institution, the MDA, in terms of putting the information in there and providing the resources, and providing the specific, let's say, documentation or backing for a particular transaction. The central bank does not see any of that. So we do not see, for instance, the contract with a contractor. We do not see the signed, let's say, completion of work certificate, which are important things in terms of a payment on a particular project. That is not what we see. What we see is the authority, and compare that to the mandate of the person who authorizes the transaction to take place. And so, in a sense, we connect that person and the institution on the other side. The institution, in this case the bank, has a responsibility to, with regard to the final destination of those resources. After all, it is their customer that is getting paid. And they should know the customer's KYC. So they should know the customer, know what sort of operation he's involved in, what sort of contracts he's involved in, what are the payments and so forth. And if indeed there are questions, meaning, for instance, somebody has a salary account and suddenly there's a 10 million Kenya shillings that bumps into that salary account for what, that should raise a flag and that should be dealt with. So I think the responsibilities are quite clear, and I think that is what we've tried to remind all the entities. And I think for those that have put in place systems to deal with it, I think it has worked reasonably well. And I think for me, the issue is that we have seen certain instances where this process has broken down. And this is the corruption issues that you just now mentioned. And I think the way to deal with that is to go after those specific persons, meaning provide that personal culpability or responsibility in terms of the transactions that they inappropriately pushed through, or for that matter, paid for things that shouldn't have been paid for. You asked about liquidity management. I would remind members that liquidity management has improved, and indeed liquidity in banks has improved over the last 3 years. We had a major concern, particularly when there were those following in the back, as it were, on the back of the 3 receiverships, or maybe the first one was more than a receivership, but in the context of that. But since then, we've managed liquidity, and liquidity in the market has actually improved quite well. The distribution of liquidity has also improved, and the smaller banks are now getting liquidity appropriately. So if you look at our sort of support window, the activity there has actually come down quite well. And I think this is something that is, you can see there is normalcy that has returned in the economy. So we are not so concerned, and but I think the point here is we still need to improve, and there are certain plans that we have that we are executing in terms of improving the interbank market, and also other things that will improve liquidity management in our country. You probably remember that liquidity has always been lopsided, meaning it is, you have in the interbank market, you have 2, let's say, sets of banks that are operating, the large banks and the smaller banks, and that has always been something that we want to consolidate and have one market instead of two markets in the same place. finishing off quickly the issue of interest rate caps that was raised. I think this has always been problematic. But I think the point here, I would want to say that there are various things that we need to do that have little to do with the cap as such, but rather addressing the issues that led to the concerns that led to the caps. That's what we are doing. And we have been working quite diligently in some of these things. A lot of it relate to customer protection, consumer protection, but it is more than just consumer protection. It is also making banks much more customer-centric, making them follow a better business model. And I think the point here is that it is a whole set of them, a whole set of issues that we are dealing with, which in the end will support a much more even, let's say, even financial sector or even banking sector, and which will then make the interest rate caps redundant or, in a sense, irrelevant. So that is the way we are thinking about this. Of course, the interest rate caps is something that we hope, as we have mentioned before, we would need to see that it has been hurting the economy in particular ways. There's one element which I think is important, and I will move, is the element of the small and medium-sized enterprises. This is key. Honorable members, it is important to recognize that our economy runs on SMEs. And it's true, we can look at the large corporates, and for whatever reason, they maybe are the ones that are paying the most taxes and things like that. But at the end of it, the employment and production, a lot of it is taking place in the medium and small-sized enterprises. And this we need to support. And I think the plan there is to, it's not a one-size-fits-all, sort of one solution that will deal with it. But we need to support it in terms of, for instance, access to credit in particular ways, in terms of, maybe access to other facilities, improving their ecosystem, licensing, and other things that need to be dealt with. I want to finish with the question that was mentioned, that honorable member, you mentioned talking to Njoroge in terms of the economic growth. Where are we going with this? And you wanted clarity about how the economy is doing. And I'll just say a few things on this. We summarized last year as a year where the economy was very resilient. We saw our economy bouncing back quite well. And at this moment, we estimate that the growth in 2018 was something like 6.1%, 6.1%. And it's true, there are other estimates of 6%, but this, by any estimation or by any, in any way of looking at it, is a good outcome. The only thing is that, and actually, if it continues into 2019, we expect that growth will be upwards of 6.3%. And I'll finish on this, Chair. But I think the point for us is, even as GDP has grown that rapidly, we have seen some areas of weaknesses, which is, and I wanted to mention the SMEs. And so the issue of dealing with SMEs is extremely important. But even as we say that, there has been some sectors that have rebounded quite strongly. And I think you should take credit for some of these things. Tourism, for instance, has rebounded very, very well. I mean, we have had more than 2 million visitors last year. And you can see the hotels have actually very strong occupancy rates and things like that. Agriculture rebounded quite well. As you know, most of our, something like 70% of our population is dependent on agriculture for its livelihood. So that is important. Manufacturing has also strengthened. And so there are specific points of weaknesses. For instance, some of the retail questions that we talked about, we have mentioned before in terms of some of the retail sector or retail, that have closed, services that are no longer operating. But I think the point here is that on the whole, the economy is moving up, but we cannot forget those that we need to bring along with us, and meaning to have much more even, or let's say well-distributed growth, so as shared prosperity for all our citizens. Thank you, Chair. That's what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you very much. Just one question by Vice Chair.
Perhaps before you wind up, Bwana Governor, you could share with us what the Attorney General, the idea of the Attorney General in relationship to this case where you are sued about Section 33. And also to ask you, being the person at the helm of our central bank, and a short while ago you have said that Charterhouse problem has not been sorted. It is still in court. Imperial Bank, pyramid schemes. It appears only Kenyan depositors have to keep on suffering as Kenyans wait for these matters before court. And then we have this matter again of Section 33. We are still waiting in court. Are you not afraid that the court system is holding us back, and that economic saboteurs and criminals are using the justice system as a safe haven to take refuge?
Please proceed. I think the very, very important question which has put across is that you informed us that you thought it was good to seek Attorney General opinion. But I think at no point did we hear what was the opinion of the Attorney General.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, members, again for these two questions. I think the first one, the Attorney General's opinion. I need to make, so we asked him, or we sent the question, but what I wanted to say is that we got overtaken by events. And the events in this case was being sued by the entity that we mentioned, and so we had to present ourselves before a court of law. That is really what happened. So in a sense, his answer at that point became immaterial. He hasn't given us an answer. However, may I finish?
Yes, before, on the same, yes.
Yes, on the same. You have this petition 426 of 2018, in which Parliament is the main defendant, and the CBK is an interested party, I believe, isn't it? Are there any order that the court has issued to stop the implementation of that law?
Okay, may I proceed, Chair?
Yes. And of course, as you proceed, you have rightly said that it was overtaken by events. But you see, the Attorney General and the Central Bank is government entities. Do they stop talking when an outsider has suddenly spoken in court? No. And there is no order to stop you from talking, so that you are of the same mind now. At least the Attorney General will have given you that this one is looking like ABCD.
So, Chair, thank you. The point again is we have made our position known to the courts, and he also has made his position. He has presented his finding, just his position about all the questions that were raised, and National Assembly has also done the same. So, in a sense, this isn't just the Central Bank and the Attorney General. On the contrary, but if I may finish this, actually the point still is that the matter is before the court, and it will be determined by the court.
Chair,
So,
Chair, my point is just simple. Is there a court order restraining the implementation of a law that has the force of law in this country for us to wait for a determination? Is there a court order?
Chair, may I proceed?
Yes, Governor.
Okay. I think I want to emphasize that we have not stopped implementing. We have not stopped implementing. I did say that the law as we found it was unimplementable, but it is not because we determined or somebody else determined that we should not implement. That actually would not be consistent with the points that we raised earlier, which is we do believe that we have to act always in terms of obeying the law and implementing it.
All right.
Chair, may I finish the last point?
Yes, yes. So, members, what is coming out very clearly from the governor is that his opinion is that the law is not implementable. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes, so that's what he has said.
Yes, I get it, Chair. And then the implication is that he has chosen not to apply a law that has been passed by this Parliament. That is the upshot of it.
Yeah, what is very clear, members, is that he has said the law is not implementable, and therefore he has chosen not to implement. That is it. That's the conclusion.
Members, I'm not familiar with all the language, so I don't want to, let's say, rebuttal the language. But I think I've been clear as to where we stand in terms of this. And really, this is why we needed a judicial determination on it, which we hope to have discussed and ventilated. And so,
Bwana Governor,
yes.
you know, what we are getting is that you have gotten a lot of comfort in that suit, and therefore, you know, anybody who has who is sitting here can really see that that is a good refuge for you, and therefore, is it likely that, yes, can you say, as a public officer, is it likely that your office, in one way or the other, have been communicating with this group of people who went to court so that you are seeking refuge comfortably in that suit?
Yeah. Chair, I want to be absolutely clear on this. If the matters that we discussed a moment ago are waiting, and the central bank takes this as significant, let's say, amendment. As I said, the impact of it are far-reaching. So there's no way we can just sit taking comfort on something staying idle. So, Chair, please, from our perspective, it may appear like we are doing nothing, but that is not true. Meaning, from our perspective, we are very concerned about this amendment. And I think this was the spirit with which we made our presentation. So if I may finish on the last.
For this act or this law not to be implemented, you should have gone for an order first.
Chair. Members, obviously, from the way the governor is speaking, you know, you have the answer. That they have said the law, the way it is not implementable, and they have chosen not to implement. But he's saying there are some other activities which he's not telling us what he's doing to progress, because that is the last statement. So let us allow him to conclude. Then we can see if there will be any other preliminary question. But please, because, you know, we have some other business before we close.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I only have one other point, which was the question about the courts. The Vice Chair asked the question, whether we can take comfort in the judicial process. And I think the point for us is we have always had concerns, which we have ventilated in various ways. in some specific cases, how some cases, through legal maneuvering and through applications end up delaying justice. And I think that point was very well taken in the context of the anti-corruption conference that took place about a month ago or a few weeks ago. That point was well explained by everybody in the room appreciated it, and the need to make sure that the wheels of justice actually turn much faster. So in terms of the outcomes, obviously we leave it to the determination of the court. We have also had questions in some of the cases that we have put forward, and where we felt that justice was not served, but we ended up using the judicial process. So I think that's the spirit with which we are approaching all the concerns, the legal concerns that we have, such as the one you mentioned in Charterhouse and the others that are on our mandate. With that, Chair, I think I finished all the questions that were raised.
Chair, allow me to just...
Okay, Mheshimiwa Atandi and Mheshimiwa Omulele, lastly.
Last.
Please, in brief.
That mean because the law is very simple and I'm not getting it. What do you mean by the law is not implementable? And the question I asked you earlier, whether there exists regulations governing withdrawals and deposits, if there exists. Because in our view, those regulations, if they exist and you're implementing them, they're illegal or irregular. And we want you to make them, to regularize them through bringing your regulations to us. So what is so difficult in CBK bringing the regulations to Parliament and Parliament adopting them? How hard is that? I want to understand how hard such a process is.
Thank you. Just further to what my brother Atandi has said, is the governor aware that by failing to comply with these specific and very clear provisions of the law, all the regulations that he is now implementing in the banks, they are illegal and irregular, and therefore they have no force of law in this country called Kenya? And secondly, is he aware that by what he has said, that he has chosen not to follow the letter of the law as passed by this Parliament, that he is in contempt of this very Parliament before which he appears today?
Yes, Mheshimiwa Daud. Those are not questions really, but they are concerns. When a governor, you have heard it yourself, that when the law has been made and you find that it is not implementable, and you are not writing in fact, what you have said here in these documentations which you have presented to this committee, I can actually say that you have not indicated which side is not implementable. And therefore, we find it very difficult to understand why you want to operate on your own. And you want to issue, every Kenyan respects the law. And they normally go to, wherever they go to the bank. If there is a regulation or there is a memo or what it is, they believe that it came through Parliament. And every Kenyan is asking that you, Parliament, has done ABCD. And therefore, we don't want any actions which will be done through the courts to be futile. Because you see, currently, if I had put it to you earlier, that anybody who is taken to court, it will be very difficult for you to use the same memos you issue to actually prosecute your case. And therefore, it is the only way out is for you to be very objective and look at the law and follow the Statutory Instrument Act process, which covers everything, including public participation. You bring them to Parliament, then we regularize. But now you have said it is not implementable, and therefore you have chosen not to implement. I think that is the conclusion, members, and therefore I think we call it at that. Yeah, we wish you well. You have, at least today you have appeared before us after several attempts not to appear, to the extent that these members thought that, and Parliament pronounced itself that it might have been intentional not to appear before this Parliament, and therefore we had given you the last chance. It's good that you have come, because we are going to move to the next level of summon. And this Parliament has the same powers with the Court of Law in terms of enforcing its mandate. And therefore, members, I think we call it at that. We wish you well. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes.